So it sounds like the ideal situation would be to have solar and insulation, you know, and then once you feel like you've got that right, you could consider going off the grid. I mean, why would you go off the grid?
Numerous different reasons. In Australia, we tend to have a very stable national grid, electrically speaking, in terms of the power, the voltage, the frequency, the fluctuations to the power. So we don't have a lot of requirements for being on an isolated system for safety. Some countries, especially a whole bunch of countries with land masses that far increase on our own, they have fluctuations of up to 100 or 200 volts at a time. So little electronics fry and break, and people's light bulbs, you know, burn out. So people tend to want some security over those systems. In Australia, because of the kind of varied landscape and the strange way that we have been set up over the last 200 years of all crowded in a city and then a huge amount of distance to the next city instead of lots of little towns, you get people building properties out that might be 20 or 30 kilometres away from a town. They might be building on a block which the house site might be 1 or 2 kilometres back from the boundary. A friend of mine recently was looking at costings for the local SPOsnet, the local electricity supplier, and he was building 1 kilometre in from the boundary. There were telegraph poles running past the boundary, and the quote was $35,000 just to dig the trench or run the line.
Wow.
And so we were talking, and I said to him, "You're going to pay $35,000 just to bury the cables, and then you're going to pay them $2,000 to $4,000 a year every year for the rest of your life anyway." Doesn't really seem like a terribly good solution. But I'm quite a proponent of when you can do systems correctly, you know, and the national grid is fantastic for industry and large power users. But I think that a lot of small homeowners are starting to realise that they're actually very capable of generating and managing their own energy systems. It makes you very conscious of your energy use. You know?
Well, I mean, if you do the insulation properly, which is very economical, then what does it cost to install a battery system?
So for a standard house, let's just make a hypothetical picture of four people, 2 adults, 2 children in a house. Maybe let's just say it's like a 3-bedroom house.
100 square metre home.
Yeah, let's go with that. Something simple. If we assume that it's completely off-grid, we're building out in not even necessarily the country, you know, just an hour out of Melbourne, but back from the boundary, I would expect if the house had electric hot water, maybe hopefully they had solar boosted electric hot water, and if they use electric hot plates for cooking and general televisions, computers, that kind of thing, I would expect that they would be using per day, on average, between 10 to 15 kilowatt hours. Now, when you size a battery system for a house, you need to first of all understand what their average daily load is, and then you calculate kind of a worst case scenario. So for the house that uses 15, let's say 17 to 20, just to really cover the bases so they have power. And then depending on your location, so talking about Melbourne, we need to accommodate for the winter and the cloudy weather because we don't have sun every day. And so that's called autonomy. So if you get a quote from someone to build an off-grid system, they will sit you down with a long list and you'll have to fill out how many hours do you use the television, how energy efficient is your television, how insulated is your house, how often do you use heating, what kind of temperature. It's quite a questionnaire. They get this kilowatt per hour day value, and then the person who's installing the system, they will just multiply that by 3. So the minimum standard is 3 days of autonomy, and that means that if it was raining flat pack for 3 days, you know, like it will be tomorrow, that you've actually got enough power to run your house for all of your requirements for 3 days with no real sunshine gain. Yeah? Talking about solar, not talking about wind or hydro. So if we take our little model of a 15 kilowatt hour day use and we multiply that by 3, we need to provide 45 kilowatt hours of total storage that we can draw from. So once you've got that figure, the next question that comes along is what kind of battery system will provide that? And all the different battery systems, they have different pros and cons. The batteries that are the cheapest to buy, usually you need to oversize the battery system enormously. and the batteries that are the most expensive, you can use almost all of them, all the energy embodied. So a very short example would be, for that little household, if we had a 45 kilowatt per hour system, kilowatt hour system for 3 days, and we wanted to just do it as cheaply as possible, we would look at lead acid batteries, flooded wet cell lead acids. They've been around since 1840. You know, they're well tested. And because of the way that the battery chemistry works, we could only use 30 to 40% of it before we recharge it, unless we want to kill it within a couple of years. So we'd need a 70 to 80 kilowatt hour battery system minimum, and it would last for maybe 7 to 10 years, or warranted for that. That would be costing us well over $50,000 to $60,000 just for that.
Yeah.
If we did that in lithium, everyone talks about the Tesla Powerwall. You know, that's a lithium-based battery system. They're called trimetal: nickel, manganese, cobalt, nickel, aluminium, cobalt. You can use up to 90% of the energy that's stored. So the battery system can be much smaller, but the cost of the battery is 2 to 3 times that of lead anyway. So you're still looking at a system that could be 50 to 60,000 for that.
That's the Tesla one.
That's for a Tesla, yeah.
No, that's a replacement, same sort of period, or do you get 20 years out of it?
No. So battery systems, usually their cycle life is dependent on the amount that you draw them down and recharge them. There's way too many battery systems to talk about different options and pros and cons. There's some that last for hundreds of years, but they are priced out of people's range, or they're made of silver and gold, you know. Yeah. So generally, when people look at that, they start adding up the figures, they start sweating, and they usually turn a bit grey. And that's when you go back through the list and you say, right, well, let's have a look at what we can remove from here. And the very first thing is heating. So if you can show people that if you can reduce your heating expectations, so that even if it's a gas heater, if you're dropping down so that you only have to run the heater at 18, 17 degrees,
16,
yeah,
I think they
right.
say 16, 18.
With a well-insulated house.
With a well-insulated house.
And that's in a cold day like this in winter. Then you might be able to show that over the total amount of your runtime, you've halved your cost of gas in that example. If you were trying to do that with electric space heating, you might reduce from 15 kilowatt hours a day of heating to 4 or 3. So we're talking about a huge amount of drop. And then people look further at things like hot water systems. I know some really smart people, they put their hot water systems, the storage tank, inside a portion of the house so that the heat isn't just lost to the air. And then I have a friend who called places like Envirowall and Envirocell to wrap that in insulation as well.
So, and also insulating your water pipes. From your hot water service to wherever underneath your house, if you can insulate them, that also really reduces